The sound of a hand slamming against a wooden table cut through the kitchen like a whip. "If you can't even mop a floor properly, I don't know why you're working here," said Julian Blackwell, his voice sharp and echoing. The clatter of pots ceased. Conversations died mid-sentence. All eyes turned toward the woman clutching a mop in trembling hands. Claire Morgan didn't raise her head. Her knuckles whitened around the mop handle, the calluses on her palms pressing into the worn grip like battle scars. It was her first day working at the Atelier, the flagship restaurant in Blackwell's high-end empire. She had scrubbed that floor for nearly an hour. It shone. "I'll clean it again, sir," she murmured, barely audible. "You'd better," Julian replied, dragging his finger across the freshly mopped tiles. Excellence is not optional in my kitchen. The silence was suffocating. Cooks and servers froze. In place, none daring to intervene. Julian Blackwell wasn't just a celebrity chef. He was a legend. Revered for his visionary plates, feared for his temper. Claire turned back to the floor. Every movement watched, every breath a quiet scream. In the midst of this theater of humiliation, life in the kitchen continued. Barely. Knives chopped with less rhythm. Orders were whispered, not called. Julian moved like a predator, scanning each workstation. His voice exploded again. "This is raw," he shouted, hurling a piece of undercooked fish into a trash bin. "Who cooked this garbage?" A young chef stepped forward, his eyes wide, hands trembling. I did, chef. I'm sorry." "Sorry doesn't cut it. You don't serve trash in my kitchen," Julian growled, running a hand through his immaculately styled hair. "You're all incompetent." Claire kept working, trying to disappear. But as she passed the fish station, she noticed something. The fryer temperature. It was far too low. She didn't say a word, but paused for a moment too long. Julian caught it. "You," he snapped. "What are you staring at? Think you know more than my chefs?" Claire froze. She didn't want this attention. Not again. "Answer me," Julian barked, stepping closer. "I saw you looking at the fish like you had something to say. If you're such an expert, prove it. Cook something, now." The room stood still. No one breathed. Claire glanced around. They were waiting for her to fail. She could feel it. She took a long breath. Then, slowly, she leaned the mop against the wall. "What would you like me to prepare?" Julian's lips curled. "Surprise me 15 minutes. No further words were exchanged. Claire washed her hands, tied back her hair, and stepped into a station like she had done 1,000 times before in another life. Her movements were precise, calm, unhurried. She pulled shrimp from the cold storage, grabbed tomatoes, dried chilies, garlic, fresh cilantro, and lemon. She didn't speak. She cooked. One by one, the aromas began to change the air. The tension shifted. Even Julian stood still, watching. Lucas, the sous chef, discreetly pulled out his phone and began to record. Claire adjusted the flame, tasted, corrected. In 10 minutes, the dish was plated. Shrimp in guajillo chili sauce, over lemon-scented. Rice garnished with coriander leaves, and a delicate slice of roasted garlic. It looked like it belonged on the cover of a culinary magazine. Julian hesitated before tasting. Then he took a bite. The reaction was immediate. His expression flickered. Surprise, confusion, reluctant awe. He took another bite. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" he asked, trying to sound unimpressed. "At home," Claire replied simply. Julian set the plate down, masking his admiration behind a veil of indifference. Not bad, for a beginner. But the kitchen had already seen his reaction. Lucas lowered his phone, a quiet grin on his face. Everyone had seen it. "Back to work," Julian ordered, retreating into his office. "And clean up this mess." As Claire gathered the used utensils, she noticed the staff watching her differently now, some with interest, others with unease. Whatever she had been trying to hide, she had just let a piece of it slip. There was no turning back. What no one yet realized was that Lucas had already uploaded the video. The title, "Famous Chef Humiliated by His Own Cleaner." Within hours, it would explode online. Across town, Margaret Blackwell, Julian's retired mother, squinted at her phone inside the common room of Silver Pines retirement home. Surrounded by curious fellow residents, she watched the viral video unfold. Julian, red-faced and fuming, while a woman in plain clothes cooked like a seasoned master. "Oh my," Margaret murmured, her voice tight with something between surprise and realization. "I know that woman." Back at the restaurant, Julian was fighting a war he hadn't expected. Social media had erupted. His tantrum and Claire's calm mastery had become a global sensation. "Lucas," he bellowed, slamming open the office door. "You filmed that garbage?" Lucas didn't flinch. "Sorry, chef, I didn't think it would go viral." "You're fired," Julian roared, slamming a fist into the desk. "Pack your things." Meanwhile, Claire scrubbed a bathroom stall. She hadn't seen the video, didn't care to. Fame didn't interest her, only survival did. "Claire," said Maria, a server. "Everyone's talking about you. You're famous." "I'm not interested in fame," Claire replied flatly. "I just want to keep my job." "But that dish, and it was incredible. Where did you—" Before she could finish, Julian appeared at the end of the hall, his face stiff, voice unexpectedly calm. "Claire, my office. Now." The staff exchanged looks as Claire followed him into the back office. He closed the door behind them. "That video's gone viral," he said, eyeing her. "You didn't post it." "I don't use social media," she replied, unbothered. Julian leaned in. "That dish you made, that's not something you pick up cleaning floors." Claire stayed silent. "My mother called this morning," he continued. "She says she recognizes you, but can't quite place where." A shadow passed through Claire's eyes, but quickly vanished. She must be mistaken. Julian wasn't convinced. "Who are you really, Claire Morgan?" Her answer came without hesitation. "Just a woman who needs this job. Am I being fired?" The calmness in her voice disarmed him. He had expected excuses, defensiveness, not composure. "No," he said almost reluctantly. "Actually, I want to offer you a position in the kitchen, as an assistant." Claire raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "Because this is a business," Julian said with a tight smile. "And the public wants to see the famous cleaner in the kitchen." Good publicity. She understood exactly what he meant. It wasn't admiration, it was strategy. "You start tomorrow," he added, condescending. "Don't expect special treatment." "I never have," Claire answered, standing and walking to the door. Miles away in a dim retirement room, Margaret dug through old boxes until she found it, a faded culinary magazine from 5 years ago. On the cover, a woman smiled, holding a trophy. Younger, hair different, but unmistakably the same face. "I knew it," Margaret whispered. "Claire Morgan is Claire Bennett, the chef from the Barcelona fire." And just like that, the past began to flicker back to life. The silence in Julian Blackwell's apartment was rare. He sat at his desk, the early morning light bleeding through tall windows, casting shadows across his expensive, orderly life. The magazine lay open in front of him, pages trembling slightly in the breeze of the overhead fan. Claire Bennett. It wasn't a name he had heard in years, but now that it was placed next to that face, there was no denying it. It was her. The same woman who had made international headlines 5 years ago. The same woman now mopping floors in his kitchen, or at least pretending to. He studied the cover again. Claire, radiant, confident, holding a golden trophy in one hand, the name of her restaurant, La Brasa, printed boldly beneath it. A Michelin 3-star chef, the youngest woman ever to achieve the feat in Western Europe. And then the fire. He remembered the coverage. The blaze had gutted the restaurant during a service night. Her husband, Andrew Bennett, had been inside. The official report cited an electrical short, but the media had been merciless. Speculations, anonymous accusations, headlines that clung to her name like soot, negligence or ambition. The fire that burned the crown. And after that, nothing. She had vanished. Until now. Julian closed the magazine and stared at the screen of his laptop. He opened a folder, one recently sent by a private investigator he'd hired within hours of Margaret's call. He hadn't trusted his mother's instincts at first, until the magazine fell into her lap. Claire Morgan, born Claire Bennett. Originally from a small town in the American Midwest, trained in Paris, refined in Spain, crowned in Barcelona, married to Andrew Bennett, sommelier, business partner, soulmate. A fire, a tragedy, and then silence. The final line of the report stuck with him like a thorn. No confirmed public sightings since the restaurant's destruction. Status unknown. But not anymore. Now she was working under his roof, cooking dishes better than half his senior staff, drawing attention he hadn't earned. And yet, something about her presence lingered with him. It wasn't just curiosity, it was recognition. Not of her face, but of something deeper. A weight she carried. A silence that said more than words. In the kitchen, Claire had begun her new role as a junior assistant. She wore the standard uniform, no longer pushing a mop, but standing quietly beside prep tables, executing every task with mechanical precision. She didn't talk unless necessary. She never bragged. But her knife work was flawless, her palette undeniable. And she had a habit, subtle, almost imperceptible, of correcting the mistakes of others without a word. A pan left too long on heat. A sauce about to split. Claire would fix it without drawing attention. Some noticed, some resented. But Julian noticed everything. He stood at a distance most days, watching. Something was changing in his kitchen. The rhythm, the mood. Her presence, though subdued, had unsettled the balance. Not because she demanded space, but because excellence has a presence even when it whispers. Julian called Grace, his pastry chef, into his office one afternoon. "What do you think of the new girl?" he asked, feigning casual interest. Grace shrugged, but her eyes held weight. "She knows what she's doing too well." "Too well," he echoed. "She's not some overnight wonder. She's trained, disciplined, refined. She moves like someone who's done this for decades, not days." Julian nodded slowly. "So she's not a beginner?" "Far from it," Grace replied. "She's something else. And she's not here just to make a living. She's hiding." Julian didn't respond. He already knew. The only question left was why. That evening he received a message from his mother. "We need to talk. Don't brush me off. It's important." About her. He hesitated, then drove to Silver Pines. Margaret was waiting in the common room, a blanket draped over her knees, eyes sharp behind elegant reading glasses. "You knew who she was before I did," Julian said, sitting opposite her. "Not at first," Margaret admitted. "But the moment I saw her cook, the control, the silence, the intensity, I knew I'd seen it before. She was on the cover of that Spanish culinary magazine." "You remember the fire?" Julian nodded. "She was cleared." "But the press crucified her anyway," Margaret continued. "She lost everything. Her husband, her restaurant, her name. And now she's in your kitchen, mopping floors, trying not to be noticed." Julian frowned. "But why here? Why now?" "Maybe because she thought this city was big enough to disappear in. Maybe because you advertised for low-skill staff and she needed the money. Either way, she didn't come for revenge, Julian. She came to survive." He leaned back in his chair, tension coiling in his jaw. "Then why cook at all?" "Because it's who she is," Margaret said simply. "You can't bury what you were born to do." That night, Julian lay awake. He thought about Claire's hands, the way they moved without hesitation, the way she turned ingredients into moments of truth. He remembered her standing silently as he screamed, absorbing the cruelty without a word. He had mistaken that. Silence for submission, but it had been something else. Endurance, the kind that came from knowing who you are, even when the world tries to erase you. In the days that followed, Claire continued to work in silence. She arrived early, stayed late, and never complained. Some of the team began to respect her. Others feared her. One of them, Ethan, Julian's former protégé, simmered with resentment. To him, Claire was an outsider, elevated by accident, threatening the hierarchy. He began watching her closely, whispering with suppliers, digging through the archives of her past. And then, on a rainy Tuesday morning, it happened. A headline. "The Chef from the Flames, Claire Bennett, the Fallen. Star of Barcelona now cooking at Blackwell's?" An anonymous tip. A few blurry photos. The old story revived. The press devoured it with glee. Claire read the headline in silence, her face pale as ash. Julian stormed into the kitchen, furious. "We'll issue a statement. We'll call it slander. My lawyers—" But she wasn't listening. She was already gone. As her apron hung motionless on its hook, the kitchen stood still, and in that silence, Julian Blackwell realized he had just lost the one person who reminded him what excellence actually looked like. She walked out the back door of the restaurant without a word. The rain had softened into a cold mist, soaking through her uniform as she moved quickly down the alley. Claire didn't run. She didn't look back. But inside her chest, something collapsed with every step. Not anger, not even fear. Just the familiar sting of history repeating itself. She had known this day would come. Back in the kitchen, Julian Blackwell stood frozen beside the prep table, her apron still swinging slightly from its hook. The rest of the staff moved cautiously, not sure whether to continue working or hold their breath. The headline was still plastered across the open screen of his phone. The chef of the flames, Claire Bennett, rises from ashes in Blackwell's kitchen. It wasn't even the worst of it. The article rehashed every speculation from 5 years ago. The faulty wiring, the anonymous sources blaming her for lax safety, the rumors that she'd pushed too hard for a Michelin 4th star and cut corners, and of course, the tragedy. That cemented the scandal. Andrew Bennett, her husband, found lifeless in the burning building, trapped trying to save their wine collection and her original handwritten recipes. The article didn't say she was guilty. It didn't have to. The insinuations did the damage. Within hours, the restaurant's reservation list began to shrink. A few clients called to cancel. Others, bolder, asked to be served by anyone but her. Ethan, always too eager, had already given 2 interviews under the guise of anonymity, whispering doubts, planting seeds. In the office, Julian's lawyer suggested a public relations campaign, a counter-narrative, perhaps even a staged photo of reconciliation. But Julian didn't respond. He was watching the rain fall outside, wondering where Claire had gone, and why her leaving left such a sharp, hollow ache in the middle of his chest. Claire, meanwhile, had returned to the small apartment she barely called home. She didn't bother turning on the light. She sat on the floor beside the door, rain, still clinging to her clothes, and stared at the dark. The past wasn't knocking. It had barged in and made itself comfortable again. She remembered the heat, the smoke, the way Andrew's voice had sounded the last time she heard it, strained, but calm. "I've got it, Claire, just go." She had been outside already, trying to usher out the last servers and diners. He had gone back for something she told him wasn't important, but it was to him. He died surrounded by memories. And the world decided she was to blame. The official report said electrical failure, but the press found it easier to say chef pushes too far, safety compromised. Husband dies in blaze of ambition. The truth had never mattered, so she stopped trying to tell it. After the fire, she had disappeared. 3 different countries, 4 kitchens, always under a new name, always as someone less. A line cook, a dishwasher, day prep assistant, and finally a cleaner. It was easier to exist when no one expected anything of you. She thought she had let go of Claire Bennett. That name belonged to someone who had something to lose. Now, even as Claire Morgan, she was reminded, people didn't forgive women who burned. Back at the restaurant, Julian paced the empty dining room late into the night. He had sent messages, called her twice. No reply. The next morning, she was gone. Not just missing, truly gone. Her apartment had been emptied. The key was left on the counter with the last month's rent fully paid. No forwarding address, no explanation, only silence. Just like 5 years ago. Julian read the note, the E. Landlord had slipped under his office door. She said she wouldn't be staying long. Seemed like she was running from something. I guess she ran again. For 3 days, Julian couldn't focus. The kitchen functioned, but lifelessly. Grace took over more responsibilities. The younger staff followed procedures but lacked energy. The critics noticed. One headline read, "Blackwell loses his spark." Another simply said, "What's missing at the atelier?" The worst part? He agreed with them. He hadn't realized how much she had shifted the atmosphere, quietly, without fanfare. She had brought gravity, clarity, something real. And now, all that remained was the weight of what he hadn't done in time. On the IT. Fourth day, Margaret came to the restaurant. She sat across from Julian in his office and placed a gentle hand over his. "You hurt her," she said simply. "I didn't publish that article." "No," Margaret agreed. "But you let her stand." In the crossfire again, Julian looked away. He hated when his mother was right. "I didn't know how much she'd been through," he said. "Then maybe you should have asked," Margaret replied. "Because women like her, they don't survive what she did by accident. They rebuild themselves piece by piece, even if no one is watching. And when the world comes to burn them again, they still show up, until it becomes too much." Julian closed his eyes. "She brought something out in you," his mother continued. "Something good, something human. Don't lose that now." That night. Julian stayed late, not for work, but for memory. He walked the line she used to stand at. He touched the knife rack where her tools had rested, perfectly aligned. He looked at the station where she plated the shrimp dish that started it all. He remembered the silence of the kitchen as everyone watched her cook, not with noise or ego, but with grace, precision, soul. For a moment, he wasn't in the restaurant anymore. He was beside her, watching her slice tomatoes, listening to her laugh once, just once, when someone mispronounced guajillo for the fourth time. That laugh had stayed with him longer than it should have, and then, from nowhere, he remembered something. Puebla. She had mentioned it in passing one day. A quiet town, far from here, a place where she had family. She'd spoken of a bakery run by her aunt. It had seemed trivial at the time. Now it felt like the only thread he had left. Without a word to his staff, Julian Blackwell made a decision. For the first time in a decade, he would close the restaurant, not for renovations, not for press, but for something more important. Needed to find her, not because she was good for business, not even because he owed her a second chance, but because she had given him something rare, a glimpse at who he could have been had he not buried himself under ego and fire. The sign on the door read, "Temporarily closed for renovations. Thank you for your understanding." It was the first time Julian Blackwell had ever shut down the atelier without a plan to reopen the next day. His staff was stunned. Grace called twice. Lucas sent a cautious message. "Are you okay?" He didn't respond. For the first time in years, he wasn't chasing a reservation list or a Michelin inspector. He was chasing something else entirely. The flight to Puebla, Mexico was short, the layover long, the silence in his head endless. All he had was a name and a memory. Claire, in a rare, unguarded moment, mentioning an aunt who ran a small bakery in the heart of the city. It hadn't meant anything at the time, but now it was all he had. He arrived just before sunset. The city was vibrant in its quiet way. Colonial streets stretched in neat lines, colorful buildings lined with clay, tiles and window grills wrapped in bougainvillea. It wasn't hard to see why someone would come here to disappear. It was gentle, slow, anonymous. He booked a modest room at a local inn. No luxury, no fanfare, just space to think. The woman at the front desk smiled when she handed him the key. "Vacation?" she asked. "Something like that," Julian replied, trying not to sound like a man unraveling. The next morning he began his search. He didn't have a name for the bakery, only that it existed, and that Claire might be connected to it. So he walked, street by street, bakery by bakery. He bought pastries he didn't eat, asked questions he didn't know how to phrase. "Do you know someone named Claire Morgan?" He asked in one. "Claire Bennett," in another. An American woman, mid-30s, quiet. Faces smiled, heads shook. "No, senor. Sorry, no. Try up the street." After 2 days, his confidence wavered. Maybe she had never come here. Maybe it had just been a passing memory she shared. Or maybe, like before, she had already moved on, left before anyone could find her. On the third afternoon, his shoes soaked with dust, Julian wandered into a small fonda tucked into the corner of a quiet plaza. A simple sign above the door read, "The Hearth Table." Just 6 wooden tables, no menu. A chalkboard listing the day's special. mole poblano with handmade tortillas. He sat by the window. The server, a teenage boy, brought him water and a smile. "What would you recommend?" Julian asked, voice low. "The mole," the boy answered instantly. "My aunt made it. It's incredible." Julian nodded. "I'll take that then." Minutes passed. He looked around the small room. There was something warm here, not just in the food smells, but in the way the walls were painted by hand, the way each flower in a mason jar seemed deliberately placed. The kind of care that doesn't come from ambition but from love. The plate arrived. It was unassuming, dark sauce glistening over chicken, the tortillas soft, steaming. He took the first bite, and then everything stopped. The balance of flavor, the complexity, the softness, the depth. It wasn't just good. It was art disguised as comfort. And there was something unmistakable in it, a signature, not on paper, but in flavor. He had tasted it before, in his own kitchen. Only one person could cook like that. He wiped his mouth and stood slowly. "May I thank the chef?" he asked. The boy hesitated. "She's shy, doesn't really come out front. Tell her it's a guest from the atelier in Mexico City." The boy blinked, nodded, disappeared into the back. Julian waited. Nothing. After a minute, the boy returned. "She said no, sorry." Julian smiled, though it hurt. "That's all right." He paid, left a tip, and walked out. But he returned the next day, and the next, always ordering something different. And each time he was met with that same unmistakable craftsmanship, the quiet, precise brilliance that could only belong to Claire Bennett. On the 5th day, he asked about a room. The fonda also had a few guest rooms attached. The owner, a kind woman named Helen, welcomed him warmly and handed him a brass key. "It's quiet here," she said. "Hope that's what you're looking for." He stayed. Ate every meal downstairs, helped carry crates when deliveries arrived, even offered to fix a jammed window in the kitchen pantry. He never asked to see Claire again. He waited, and then, one morning he found a note slid under his door. "What are you doing here? Leave." No signature, no need for one. That night, Helen watched him as he lingered after dinner, stirring tea he hadn't touched. "My niece," she said carefully, "doesn't trust easily. Whatever hurt her, it cut deep." "I'm not here to hurt her," Julian said. "I just want to apologize and to say thank you." Helen studied him. "Words are easy, but she'll hear actions, if you're patient." So he waited. A week passed. On the 9th day, while repairing a wobbly table leg in the back patio, he heard footsteps behind him. He didn't turn around. "What are you still doing here?" came the voice. Hers. Cold, exhausted, Julian kept working. "Fixing a table. Seems like it's been crooked for a while." "You closed your restaurant." "For this?" He tightened a screw. "Not for this table, no. For you." Silence. He looked. Claire stood a few feet away, arms crossed over a plain apron, her hair pulled back without care, face without makeup. She looked different. But she still held that quiet power, as if her very presence could command a kitchen without raising her voice. "I'm not going back," she said. "I know," he replied. "That's not why I came." She studied him, searching for manipulation. "For ego, for the man who once humiliated her in front of an entire kitchen." "I came to say I'm sorry," Julian said, standing. "Not just for the video, or the press, but for not protecting you, for seeing your silence as weakness, for seeing you as less." Claire said nothing. He stepped back, letting the distance remain. "You don't owe me anything, not a return, not forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that you changed something in me. You reminded me why I started cooking in the first place, and I don't want to forget that again." She didn't speak. But later that night, when he returned to his room, there was a small tray on his table, a dessert, peaches caramelized in cinnamon and cardamom, just like the kind he once told her his mother used to make. No note, but it was enough. The next morning, Julian rose before dawn. In the quiet of the shared courtyard, dew clung to the terracotta tiles. He made his way to the kitchen entrance, uncertain of whether he was pushing boundaries or following an unspoken invitation. The dessert from the night before still lingered on his palate. But more than flavor, it was a gesture. One that said, "I see you. I haven't decided what to do about it, but I see you." The kitchen door was already open. Claire stood at the counter, sleeves rolled up, hands deep in dough. Her movements were unhurried, precise. She didn't look up. "You're early," she said without turning. "I figured I'd learn something if I showed up on time." "Then you're still late," she replied, a trace of something like humor in her voice. He washed his hands at the sink, took off his watch, and rolled up his own sleeves. She glanced at him briefly, then pointed toward a bowl of flour. "Start with this. You'll mix, not knead. Use your fingertips. The dough has to breathe." They worked in near silence. The only sounds were the soft rustle of flour, the rhythm of dough rising under warm hands, the clink of metal bowls. The air was filled with the scent of yeast and cinnamon and something older, trust being kneaded back into shape. Julian followed every instruction. He didn't challenge, didn't lecture, just listened. Claire, for her part, offered no explanations, only clarity, simplicity, the kind of leadership that didn't need to prove itself. "You press too hard," she said at one point, adjusting his hand. "It's not about force, it's about intention." "I used to think cooking was about control," he murmured. "It's not, it's about surrender." That sentence sat between them for a while, warm and heavy. By mid-morning, they had trays of dough resting under cloth. Claire poured coffee, handed him a chipped mug without ceremony, and sat across from him at the small kitchen table. For a long while, they didn't speak. Then, Julian broke the silence. "When did you stop believing you could cook again?" Claire looked at her mug. "I didn't stop believing, I stopped wanting. After Andrew died, cooking became noise. I couldn't hear myself in it anymore. And every time I stepped into a kitchen, the flames were there." He nodded gently. "And now?" She shrugged. "The noise is quieter here, the food is honest, no critics, no expectations, just mouths to feed." "It's more than honest," Julian said. "It's extraordinary." Claire didn't smile, but she didn't protest either. Over the next few days, their rhythm grew. Mornings in the kitchen, afternoons restocking shelves, or tending to the herb garden behind the fonda. Julian stayed, out of her way when needed, and in sync with her when allowed. He chopped onions under her instruction, cursing quietly through tears. She corrected his knife grip with a firm hand. He learned how to fold tortillas without breaking them. She showed him how to layer mole the way one layers memory, slowly with reverence. One day, while they shelled pomegranates for a batch of chilies en nogada, Julian paused. "My father used to say excellence required discipline," he said. "That softness was weakness." Claire said nothing for a while. Then she replied, "My grandmother said the opposite. That food made in fear always tastes bitter, that mistakes are part of the recipe. Sounds like she was the better cook." "She was," Claire said, the ghost of a smile on her lips. "She died before the fire. Sometimes I think it was a mercy. She would have been ashamed of what happened afterward. Not of the fire, of what they turned me into." "You mean what they said you were?" She looked at him. "It's not the lies that hurt most, it's the silence of those who knew better." Julian lowered his gaze. "I know." That evening, Helen stood in the doorway watching them prepare a small dinner for a family celebration. Her husband leaned beside her, arms crossed, quietly amused. "I never thought I'd see the day," Helen said. "That man used to be on television yelling at sous chefs for slicing basil wrong. Now he's washing cilantro like it's made of gold." "Love changes people," her husband said. Helen snorted. "He's not in love." "Not yet," the old man replied, "but his hands say otherwise." In the following days, Claire began to speak more, share recipes, ask for opinions. She never mentioned returning to her old life, but she let herself be seen, not just as a cook, but as a person. Julian, for his part, never rushed her. He had stopped trying to convince her of anything. He was simply there. One afternoon, after a particularly joyful lunch service, Claire sat beside him in the courtyard and asked, without looking up, "Do you miss it?" He knew what she meant. "The restaurant?" he said. "The pressure? The spotlight?" She nodded. "I miss the challenge," he answered honestly. "I miss creating something no one's seen before. But I don't miss the person I had to become to keep it running. That man that he was always angry, even when he succeeded. She was quiet for a moment. So what now? I don't know, Julian said. But I do know this is the most at peace I've been in years. She met his eyes. I was ready to quit for good, Claire said. Before you showed up, I thought maybe this was enough. Cooking for families, growing herbs, making bread. And it is, in many ways. But, he prompted, but when I cooked for those investors at your restaurant, that night, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. I wasn't just surviving. I was alive. Julian leaned forward, voice soft. So cook like that again, not for critics, not for stars, for yourself. She looked down at her hands, calloused, flour-streaked and strong. It scares me. I know, he said, but so does never trying again. She said nothing. But that night, she placed a new dish on his dinner tray, a play on an old favorite, a memory reimagined. It wasn't on the chalkboard menu, it wasn't for guests, it was for him. And in that quiet act, something changed. The fondant had changed, not in appearance. The walls were still chipped in places, the tables slightly mismatched. The handwritten menu unchanged, but there was a new energy now. A quiet current beneath the surface, like something just beginning to bloom. Claire noticed it in the way the young servers moved with more care, how the regulars lingered longer after meals. She saw it in the dishes she began preparing without overthinking. She didn't just follow recipes anymore, and she created. Each dish carried something of her, a memory, a risk, a feeling. Julian noticed it too, in the early mornings when they kneaded dough side by side. In the afternoons when she adjusted a sauce or tried something new. She had started to hum softly while she worked. It wasn't much, but it was everything. One Saturday, while preparing ingredients for the lunchtime rush, Claire turned to him. I want to teach, she said. Julian raised an eyebrow. Teach what? Cooking, techniques, fundamentals, real food, no fluff. I've been thinking, there are kids here who want to learn, home cooks who want to feed better. We could open the kitchen once a week, run workshops, free of charge. He studied her. Why now? She shrugged. Because I remember what it was like to learn from someone who cared, and because when I teach, I feel grounded. So it reminds me I still have something to offer. Julian smiled. Then let's do it. They printed a small flyer, taped it to the door. The first Saturday, only 4 people came, a high school student, a retired nurse, a teenage mother, and a mechanic. Claire welcomed them each with the same quiet warmth, guiding them through knife skills, broth bases, how to taste with intention. Word spread. By the 3rd week, there wasn't enough counter space. They brought in extra stools, old folding tables, from storage. Julian helped set up stations. Helen offered pastries for everyone at the end of class. The workshops became something of a ritual, not just about food, but community. People brought ingredients from home, shared stories, laughed over mistakes. There was no judgment, no hierarchy, just learning and joy. One evening, after the last guest left and the dishes were stacked to dry, Claire sat with Julian on the back steps. The sky was violet with sunset, the air thick with the smell of wet soil and oregano from the garden. This feels right, she said quietly. Not like the old life, not like the silence after. This. Julian nodded. It does. He hesitated, then reached into his pocket, pulled out a folded paper. She glanced at it, a contract draft, a new concept, a joint venture, not a restaurant in the city, not a revival of the atelier, something else entirely. I've been thinking, he said, what if we built something, together, from scratch? Not in your shadow, not in mine, no stars, no expectations, just food, real food, in a place like this. Claire unfolded the paper slowly. Read in silence, he watched her face. She didn't flinch, but she didn't smile either. You don't have to answer now, he added. I wanted to put the idea into the world. She looked at him, really looked. The man who once used kitchens like stages, now sitting beside her on cracked stone steps, fingers stained with chili and lime, eyes softer than they used to be. I'll think about it, she said. That night, she dreamed of fire again. But it was different. Not the roaring chaos of 5 years ago, not the choking black smoke or the sound of Andrew's voice echoing from upstairs. This time it was a hearth, gentle, steady, a fire that warmed, not destroyed. When she woke, her hands didn't shake. Later that week, while checking the herb garden, she found Julian kneeling by the basil, pulling weeds. His hands were dirt-covered, his forearms sunburned. "You don't have to do that, you know," she said. He looked up. "I like it. There's something honest about watching things grow." She smiled. "I never imagined you like this." Neither did I. They worked side by side, pruning, planting, tilling. It was slow work, repetitive, but within the rhythm they found conversation. "My father always said vulnerability was a liability," Julian said. "I believed that for a long time." Claire nodded. "Andrew used to say the opposite. He said food without vulnerability was just fuel." He sounded like a good man. He was. A pause. "You don't talk about him much," Julian said carefully. "I used to," Claire replied. Then I stopped, because every time I did, people would tilt their heads and look at me like I was a cautionary tale, a tragedy with a kitchen knife. Julian didn't answer. He simply listened. "He believed in me," she continued, "more than I ever did. He pushed me to open La Brasa, helped design the wine pairings, built the space with me from the ground up, and then one night he ran back in to grab a photo album and a notebook." Her voice caught, but only for a moment. That's the part they never mention in the articles, that he died trying to save memories. Not wine, not awards, just us. Julian didn't fill the silence. He let it stretch between them like a thread, taut and real. "You don't have to carry all of it alone," he said finally. "I'm not sure I know how to put it down," Claire replied. "But you're trying," he said. "And that matters." Later that day they worked on a new dish together, something seasonal, rooted in Puebla's ingredients, but with Claire's European finesse and Julian's instinct for contrast. It was unpretentious, grilled local fish with a tamarind glaze set over roasted corn puree and charred greens. When they tasted it, neither said anything for a while. Then Claire spoke, almost reluctantly. "That's good." Julian chuckled. "High praise." She turned to him. "I don't think I want to be invisible anymore." He met her gaze. "Then don't be." She didn't answer, but for the first time in years, she felt the weight of hiding begin to loosen. Not gone, but less. That night, she placed the contract back on his table. Signed, no fanfare, no speech, just her name. Her real one, Claire Bennett. The mornings came earlier now. Word of the hearth table had spread beyond the neighborhood. Travelers were showing up, food bloggers from nearby cities, students asking to observe the Saturday workshops. But Claire didn't change the pace. She wouldn't let growth rewrite what made the place matter. The tables remained simple, the menu handwritten, the herbs still clipped fresh each morning by Julian's dirt-streaked hands. It was midweek when Helen appeared in the kitchen doorway, her brow furrowed, a folded newspaper in her hand. "Claire," she said gently, "you should see this." Julian looked up first. Claire took the paper and unfolded it slowly. The headline struck her like a faint echo. Claire Bennett, the Phoenix of Puebla? It wasn't local, it wasn't gossip, it was Gloria Hartley, the most respected food critic in the country, known for her discretion, her brutal honesty, and more rarely, her quiet reverence. Claire scanned the article. It didn't mention the fire or Andrew or the scandal. It didn't rehash her fall. It talked about flavor, technique, philosophy, grace in simplicity. Claire set the paper down, her hands steady, but her chest tight. "She was here?" Julian asked, surprised. Helen nodded. "Last night. Came alone, dined quietly, said nothing, took notes." Claire turned away, unsure whether to feel honored or invaded. "She'll want to come back," Julian said, "this time as herself, not a ghost in the corner." He was right. 3 nights later, Gloria returned, elegant, poised, eyes sharp. As ever, she waited until the dinner service slowed before requesting to speak with the chef. Claire hesitated. For years, her instinct had been to retreat, to let others take the spotlight. But something inside her, something rekindled, said no. She wiped her hands, untied her apron, and stepped into the front of the house. "Ms. Hartley," she said. "Chef Bennett," the critic replied, standing. "Or should I say Claire?" "You can say Claire," she answered softly. They sat by the window. No cameras, no fanfare, just two women who had seen a world most people only admired from a distance. "I came here anonymously at first," Gloria said. "I wanted to taste the food, not the reputation." "I understand," Claire replied, "and I came back because what you're doing here, it's important." Claire folded her hands. "I'm not trying to make a comeback." "I know," Gloria said. "That's why it works." They spoke for over an hour about food, about the difference between precision and pretension, about what kitchens lose when they chase stars instead of stories. Gloria paused near the end. "There's something happening here," she said, "something that transcends plates. You and Blackwell, you've created a model, skill and soul, education and excellence. I'd like to write about it, properly, not gossip. A profile." Claire didn't answer immediately. "I'm not afraid of being seen," she said eventually, "but I don't want this place to be devoured by attention. It's not a brand, it's a home." "Then let me write about that," Gloria said. "The home, the people, not the scandal." Claire nodded. "If you write it, make it about the food, not the fire." Gloria smiled. The fire was never the point. When the article was published, it didn't explode. It simmered. Food lovers shared it. Culinary schools cited it. Families cut out quotes and pinned them to their fridges. Not because it exposed something, but because it reminded them what food was meant to do. Connect. A week after the article, Claire stood in the kitchen beside Julian, preparing for the evening. The staff moved with quiet confidence. The herbs were freshly picked. The masa for the tortillas sat resting under damp cloth. Everything was ready. "You okay?" Julian asked. Claire nodded. "I am." There was no panic, no lingering fear. She had faced the spotlight again, and this time it had been gentle. But not everyone welcomed her peace. Ethan had read the article too. Now working at a mid-level bistro in the capital, he seethed watching her receive praise. He had believed she would fade away. He'd made sure to stoke the old narrative, but instead she had re-emerged stronger. And worse, respected, when he quit. The atelier months ago, he left quietly. But now he reached out to a journalist, pitched a re-examination of the fire, claimed there were things the public never knew. He hinted at negligence, spoke of a colleague with secrets. The piece ran on a gossip site, tasteless, aggressive, filled with veiled accusations and anonymous sources. This time, the title wasn't subtle. Claire Bennett, a star reborn or a dangerous myth? It spread quickly. Claire read it in silence. Julian found her that afternoon, standing in the herb garden, scissors in hand, unmoving. "They'll never let it go," she said, voice low. Julian stepped beside her. "No, because they've built a story around you, one they refuse to rewrite." She turned to him. "Then maybe I shouldn't have signed that contract." "You think I asked you to build something with me because of your name?" She didn't. "Answer," Julian continued, softer now. "Claire, when I first met you, you terrified me. Not because of what you did, but because of what you could do. You reminded me of what I'd lost, and I was too small to admit it." He placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "They can write what they want, but I know the truth, and so does everyone who's ever tasted your food." That night, despite the noise online, the restaurant filled. Some clients came out of support, others out of curiosity. A few demanded to be served by someone else. Claire didn't flinch. She cooked, she plated, she led. And when a guest loudly declared, "Is this the one who burned her own husband alive?" the staff froze. But Claire didn't. She calmly turned, met his gaze, and said, "No, sir, I'm the one who survived." And then she walked back into the kitchen. That line, spoken with clarity and pain, made its way online within hours. Captured by someone in the back corner. Not rehearsed, not theatrical, just truth. It went viral. But this time the response was different. Support flooded in. former colleagues, critics, even people who had once doubted her. The narrative shifted, not because she defended herself, but because she refused to play their game. Julian watched it all unfold, standing at the kitchen door. Claire didn't say much in the days that followed. She just kept cooking, and somewhere, in the quiet between the noise, she allowed herself to feel something she hadn't in years. Freedom. There was no star on the door, no plaques, no glossy write-ups framed on the walls, no tasting menus with 20 courses or white-gloved servers gliding silently past linen-draped tables, just wooden chairs, clay dishes, and the sound of laughter from the kitchen. 3 months had passed since the article, 2 since the scandal tried, and failed, to crush Claire Bennett one last time. The waves had come, but they receded faster than ever, and what remained wasn't ruins. It was roots. The hearth table had become something else, a restaurant, yes, but also a school, a gathering space, a kitchen open to more than just those who could afford it. Claire and Julian had expanded slowly, not in size but in soul. They had rebuilt the space together, piece by piece, not chasing critics, not chasing anything really, just following what felt honest. The new garden now fed a portion of the daily menu. Locals brought produce from their own land, often trading it for meals or cooking lessons. Teenagers from the Saturday workshops had formed a small apprentice program. They didn't just cook. They learned why food mattered. Claire was in the kitchen that afternoon preparing a mousse of dark chocolate and orange zest, infused with ancho chili and a hint of orange blossom water. Julian stood at the window, updating the chalkboard with that night's specials. "Don't forget the lime soup," Claire called from across the room. Julian smirked. "You don't trust me?" "Only with the blackboard," she replied. He finished the list and stepped back. The restaurant was already half full. Tourists had begun to trickle in, not because of fame, but because of word of mouth. Locals brought friends. Visiting chefs came to learn, and no one walked out unimpressed. As dinner service approached, Julian slipped into the kitchen. Claire was plating the mousse the way she always did, quietly, precisely, like a painter finishing. The final stroke, he paused. "You look peaceful," he said. She looked up, the corners of her mouth lifting. "I feel afty steady, that's new." Julian nodded. "We've come a long way." Claire nodded too, more slowly. "You remember the first thing you ever said to me?" "Unfortunately," he replied. "I believe it was something about the floor not being clean enough." Claire tilted her head. "I've thought about that a lot. I've regretted it a lot. But it was the perfect beginning," she said. "It stripped away the myth. Let me show you who I was. Not through words, but with a plate." He stepped closer, resting a hand on the counter beside hers. "I don't care about reviews anymore," Julian said. "But if I had to name the best thing I've ever done as a chef, it's walking into that pantry and asking you why you were really there." Claire met his eyes. "And the best thing I ever did," she said, "was not walking out the first time you shouted." That silence between them now held no weight, only warmth. Later that night, they stood outside after closing. The air was thick with the scent of soil and smoke. The lights of the city flickered low. From the patio, soft music played. Someone from the kitchen strumming an old guitar, notes floating like memory through the air. Julian held 2 cups of tea. He handed one to Claire. "I never imagined I'd end up here," he said. "But I don't miss what we left behind." Claire sipped her tea. "Neither do I." There was something healing about building slowly, about earning each inch of trust, each hand that joined the table. They had created not a kingdom but a circle, a place where food didn't intimidate. It embraced. Julian turned to her. "What now?" Claire smiled. "We wake up early, chop onions, teach someone how to fold a tamale, try a new spice in an old recipe. No bigger plans?" "Maybe someday," she said, "but for now, this is enough." The next morning, as the team prepped for another busy Saturday, Claire found Julian in the herb garden, inspecting a row of mint. "You're starting to look like a farmer," she said, amused. He stood and dusted his knees. "I've come to terms with dirt. You know, she continued, walking toward him. "Before you came to Puebla, I was close to giving it all up. I thought maybe I'd teach a few kids to cook, stay quiet, live small. And now, I still want the quiet," she said, "but I don't want to hide anymore." Julian took a breath. "Would you ever open something else? A new place, completely yours again?" She paused. "Maybe, but not like before. No velvet ropes, no tasting menus with poetic names, just food, stories on a plate. I'd follow you," Julian said. Claire looked at him. "I know, but only if we lead together." He reached out and took her hand, worn, calloused, alive. They stood like that for a long moment, not needing to move, not needing to speak. Inside, the restaurant buzzed with soft energy. The apprentices chopped and stirred. Helen arranged flowers in mason jars. A new group gathered for the workshop, eager, uncertain, excited. Claire walked in with Julian beside her. She picked up a knife, tapped it against the cutting board, and said to the circle of students, "Cooking isn't about getting it perfect. It's about paying attention to your ingredients, to yourself, to each other." They nodded. She smiled. Julian stood in the doorway watching. He no longer saw the woman mopping a floor under fluorescent lights. He saw the chef, the teacher, the survivor, the artist. Claire Bennett had not returned to the top. She had returned to herself. And that, he knew, made her the brightest star of all.